Okay, let's go ahead and get started now. We're going to take a look at the general senses today. And these are the, things like touch, pressure, pain, vibration, itch. These are all general senses as opposed to the 5 special senses. We'll talk about those later on. Sight and smell and taste and hearing and balance. Those are the special senses. We're going to be talking about the general senses. Things like, temperature is a general sense, for example. Pain is a general sense. So we're going to take a look at these today. We're going to start looking at them anyway. So anybody have any questions on any of this? Okay, so this is going to be the beginning of Unit 4. And I'll bring the slide up and get out of this. And there we go. General senses and reflexes. So, what is a sensation? Well, it is a conscious and subconscious awareness of what's going on around us. It can be an internal stimulus, for example, like, like you got to pee. Okay, that's a stimulus. Your bladder says, hey, I got to pee. That is a conscious awareness of a change in your internal environment. Or, you put your hand down on something hot. That is a conscious awareness of something in your external environment. We're very much aware of those. But what happens if it's subconscious? What happens if, for example, you run up a flight of stairs and you burn more glucose in your skeletal muscles to do that, and you release more carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide is carried to your lungs, and your blood's getting more acidic because of that. Your blood pH is dropping. So your brain says, hey, we got to breathe faster to blow off the CO2. That's a subconscious awareness. You don't have to stop and think when you're running up a flight of stairs, oh, I better breathe faster now because I'm generating more carbon dioxide in my skeletal muscles as I oxidize glucose. So therefore, I better get rid of that CO2 coming from the Krebs cycle. I don't think any of us will do that. But that's what's going on. You breathe faster to get rid of carbon dioxide. That is a subconscious awareness of a change in the internal environment. You aren't paying attention to CO2 levels or pH changes in your blood, but your brain is, and the brain is aware of that. So you respond. You have a subconscious awareness of that, and then you do something about it. So sensation is both a conscious and a subconscious awareness of some type of change. It could be an internal change, it can be an external change. Now, every sensation depends on stimulating a sensory receptor. Now, if it's your bladder and telling you you got to go pee, it's because you have a stretch receptor in your bladder that's getting pressured by the bladder filling up with urine. And so, hey, I got to pee because my bladder is stretching. Okay, that's awareness. We stimulated the sensory receptor for stretch. So we stimulate a sensory receptor. If it's a change in our blood pH, we stimulate the chemistry receptor for becoming more acidic. So if we put our hand out on something hot, we've stimulated a pain or a temperature receptor. Now, it's not enough to stimulate the sensory receptor, though, because sensory receptors don't know anything. Sensory receptors have no idea what they're doing. Sensory receptors will generate a stimulus. They will generate a nerve impulse. That's all they do. They will get stimulated by some sensation, and they will generate a nerve impulse. They will not tell you what it is. All they're going to do is generate a nerve impulse. And I will tell you that every nerve impulse, regardless of the receptor, every nerve impulse is just like any other nerve impulse. They all look the same. It's how they get interpreted in the brain that tells us what they are. So a touch receptor being stimulated by someone touching you, or a pain receptor from putting your hand down on something sharp, or a stretch receptor because your bladder is full, each one of those are going to generate a nerve impulse. The nerve impulse is going to indicate something different based on how it's interpreted by the brain. But the actual nerve impulse going to the brain, they're all the same. They're all exactly the same. So the sensory receptor has to respond to the stimulus and send we say transduction of the stimulus. It has to send a signal to the brain. It has to generate a nerve impulse. Excuse me. Which is also called an action potential. Now we're just starting to get into, we're getting into muscles now in lecture, and you're going to start hearing the words action potential very soon in lecture. But an action potential is the proper term for a nerve impulse. That's why it says generation of nerve impulses and action potential. I forgot my comma. So that nerve impulse has to get to the brain, and then we have to integrate, process the sensory input, because the sensory receptor, it tells you, that it's been stimulated by pressure or by temperature or by pain, has no idea what the stimulus is. It's just a receptor designed to respond. When it's activated, it will respond with a nerve impulse. That's all it does. No idea, no clue what's going on. It generates a nerve impulse which goes to the brain, and then we have to integrate that and process it so that we can perceive what's going on. Our eyeballs have no idea what we're seeing. All they're doing is collecting light rays and being stimulated in the retina. Our ears have no idea what the sounds are that we're hearing. It's the nerve impulse that we send to the brain that allows us to process the information and perceive it. As far as the sound receptor goes, it's just a bunch of vibrations. So we don't see with our eyes, we don't hear with our ears, we collect stimuli, and then we process that in the brain. We have to integrate the sensory input. Okay. Sensory receptors are going to respond to unique and special types of stimulus. The eyeball only responds to stimulus from light. The ear only processes stimulus from sound. It is a touch receptor only responds to touch or pressure or pain or temperature. Every one of those is a different type of receptor. We ultimately trigger a nerve impulse, but now we have to interpret what that nerve impulse means. We have to be aware of the stimulus, because lots of stimuli don't even rise to the level of awareness. I mean, consider, sound that's outside the range of hearing. It's still making a sound, but we can't hear it. So we can't We're not aware of the stimulus. We don't have a sensation. A very, very gentle touch on our skin doesn't often result in awareness that someone's touched us. Or an odor may be so faint that we may not be able to detect it. So we have to be able to process information and interpret what it means. We get the term perception has to take place. We have to perceive what the stimulus is. Because yes, the nerve impulse coming off the sensory receptor, they all look the same. Every nerve impulse looks exactly the same as any other nerve impulse, but it's the part of the brain that receives that impulse that can then interpret it and say, that's vision, or over here, that's sound, or down here, that's odor. Or maybe back here, we can say, oh, we're getting more acidic in our blood, or that's stretch, I got to empty my bladder. And so, because the stretch receptor in your bladder is being activated, that's not telling you got to pee. That's just saying the stretch receptor is activated. Your brain has to take that information and interpret that and say, hey, wake up. It's 3 a.m. and you got to pee. So that's what has to happen. Now, when we look at receptors in our bodies, and our bodies are covered with receptors both internally and externally, we have to look at our receptors by the type of stimulus that we have, that we're going to receive. Where are they in the body? And just how complex are the receptors? Is it a simple little touch receptor that gets activated when you push against it? Or is it something complex like the eyeball? Probably the most complex of all of our sensory receptors. How complex is it? Is it simple? Is it very complex? Where is it located? And what type of stimulus do we respond to? So here's our nervous tissue right there. You should remember this slide from earlier on in lab. That's a neuron that you're looking at right there. And all the little purple cells next to it are glial cells. You're going to hear all about that in the chapter right after we finish up on muscles. This is nervous tissue, a neuron. This is a neuron right here. The little dark purple ones are glial cells. So there's the axon. Every neuron will send its nerve impulse down its axon somewhere, either to the brain or to another neuron. But the axon is always the sending unit of the nerve cell. There's the neuron cell body. There's the nucleus of the neuron. There's a dendrite. A dendrite is the extension on the other side of the cell body. We've got two types of extensions on a nerve cell. We have the axons where we send signals out to the brain or to another neuron. The dendrites are extensions of the cytoplasm that allow us to receive sensory input. Some types of sensory receptors are nothing more than what we call a free nerve ending. In other words, they're just a dendrite that gets pressed and it sends a signal to the neuron that can then send the signal to the brain. So we have axons and dendrites. Dendrites receive, axons send. Okay. Now, the sensory receptors are classified under two categories. They're either the general senses or the special senses. The general senses can be somatic, meaning they're on the surface, or they are visceral, meaning they're internal, around the viscera, the internal organs. The somatic senses are touch, temperature, pain, and proprioception. Proprioception is essentially position in space, if you will. Now, the visceral receptors are going to be dealing with the internal organs, the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, the bladder, for example. Do I feel bloated today? Do I have a lot of gassy feelings in my viscera? Well, because you may have had, maybe those 4 helpings of sauerkraut at lunch, followed by a bran muffin, were probably not a good idea. You may feel a little bloated because you're generating a lot of gas, of methane gas, in your small intestine as you process all that cabbage. Probably not a great idea. However, whatever, it's your choice. Now, those are the general senses. Internal organs, it tells you, is my bladder full? Is my bladder empty? Is my large intestine full? Do I have to defecate? Do I have a pain at my gallbladder? Does my gallbladder hurt? Should I probably not have eaten that fried chicken and 2 slices of cheesecake? Possibly, or not. Do you have pain in your chest? Does it hurt to breathe? Things like this. These are visceral. That's all visceral information. Now, the special senses, there's only 5 of these. Sense of smell, the ability to detect odors, taste, vision, hearing, and balance. Those are the 5 special senses. They all require special sense organs. They're all located in the head. And I will tell you that people always get touch mixed, or pain mixed in with the 5 senses, but it's only smell, taste, vision, hearing, and equilibrium. The 5 special senses. So those are the special senses. Now, what kind of stimulus do the general and special senses respond to? Well, the first thing we detect are mechanical stimulus. We have what are known as mechanoreceptors that respond to mechanical changes. Pressure on our skin. Perhaps you shut a door on your finger, or get your fingers, you're shutting a drawer and you pinch your finger there, or your bladder is full. You're stretching your bladder. Very simple mechanoreceptor is the vibration of sound waves. Sound waves vibrate. They're pressure. Sound waves are pressure waves, and they cause our tympanic membrane, our eardrum, to vibrate, and we convert that into a nerve impulse. That's a mechanical stimulus. So is touch. Yeah. So is pressure. Those are all mechanoreceptors. Thermoreceptors. We detect and monitor temperature changes, both internally and externally. We have special receptors for heat. We have special receptors for cold. Third category here are the pain receptors. We call them the nociceptors. They respond to pain. Again, they don't know where it's coming from. They don't know what's causing it. They don't even know where it's coming from sometimes, but they respond and generate a nerve impulse when they're stimulated by pain. Now, photoreceptors, located only in the eye. They are stimulated by light rays. We say vision here. The stimulus, it's really light rays that are being focused on the retina, the internal structure of our eyeball. And those light rays stimulate the production of nerve impulses so that our brain can tell us what we're seeing. Because, as I said, our eyeballs don't know what it is. But the stimulus is vision, light rays, however you want to look at it. The only place that works is in the eye. Yeah, so now chemoreceptors. monitor chemical changes within the bodies. We pick up changes in our carbon dioxide levels, like changes in blood pH, for example. Are we getting too acidic? We monitor, let's see what else, chemoreceptors. We monitor sodium bicarbonate levels in our bodies. We monitor water levels, things like that. We monitor any kind of chemical change in our bodies. Osmo receptors, I should have said water because this is how we actually detect water levels. Osmo receptors monitor salt concentrations. And we do that by monitoring sodium. Now, how does that let us detect water? Well, it doesn't. It doesn't let us detect water directly, but it lets us detect our water levels in our bodies indirectly. Because if our salt concentration goes up, our water level goes down. And so we watch the salt levels. If our salt level is elevated above homeostatic levels, then it means our water is too low. If salt concentrations are low, it means that our water levels are elevated. So we can tell indirectly what our body's water levels are simply by monitoring the salt. So this is a type of stimulus that we respond to. Mechanoreceptors, Thermoreceptors, Nociceptors, Photoreceptors, Chemoreceptors, and Osmo Receptors for monitoring salt concentrations. Now, if we take a look at the Mechanoreceptors, we get into the area of what we call the tactile sensations. The tactile sensations include touch, pressure, vibration, itch, and tickle. You know, many of us don't like being tickled. And we all know how good it feels when we have an itch and we can scratch it. And we don't know why it feels so good, but it just does feel good. Now, tactile receptors pick up all of these touching type actions. And I include pressure and vibration and itch and tickle in these touching type actions. Tactile receptors can be surface receptors. They can be deep in the skin, in the dermis receptors. We have what are known as Meissner's corpuscles, the hair root plexus, a Merkel disc, a Ruffini corpuscle, a Pacinian corpuscle, and the free nerve endings. Probably more than half of our tactile sensations are just free nerve endings. So these are the dealing with touch now. Let me go back here. The hair root plexus. The hair root plexus is, I want to point this one out. This is what happens. This is the nerve ending wrapped around the hair shaft on our skin or on our head. When wind blows across our hair and our hair moves around, we're aware of it because the hair root plexus, the nerve ending wrapped around the hair root itself, is stimulated. When somebody gently touches the surface of our skin, maybe someone strokes your skin with a feather, just indulge me here. It stimulates the nerve endings within the hair, wrapped around the base of the hair shaft. You're aware of that hair moving at the root because the nerve, the plexus means, you know, the nerve endings wrapped around the root. That's what it means. It's being stimulated by moving the hair. Okay. Why? How? Well, it's sort of it's a mechanical operation. You're pushing the hair shaft around and that stimulates the nerve ending. So then other nerve endings are the free nerve endings where there's just nothing but the nerve ending there. So more on that in a second here. So, okay. Now, what about their location? Well, we have three terms here. Enteroceptors, these are on the surface, touch, temperature, pain, for example, are all on the surface of the body. Enteroceptors are internal, pain, for example, or detecting changes in pH or changes in blood pressure. We monitor our blood pressure in two locations internally. We monitor stretch, our bladder stretch, our blood vessels stretch, our stomach stretches or contracts. All of this is being monitored internally. So enteroceptors are inside the body, in the viscera. Exteroceptors are outside on the surface. The proprioceptors are located in our muscles and in our tendons. They tell us where we are in space. They tell us where our hand is, our arm is, our foot is. We don't have to look and say, oh, there's my foot. I'm glad I checked to make sure it was still there. We don't have to do that. We know where we are at all times. We know how much force to apply to do something when we do it. When we're lifting something or moving something or wrapping something up or throwing something or driving a nail with a hammer, all of that, we're getting the information from our proprioceptors in our muscles and our tendons, telling us how much energy we need to spend to do an action. And we can adapt. So our receptors in our bodies, all these receptors are going to be in one of two categories. They are going to be simple receptors, or they're going to be complex receptors. And the simple receptors are nothing but a dendrite that is modified. It's a modified dendrite. The dendrite is the nerve fiber that receives information for the neuron. So the simple receptors, which is everything except the special senses. The simple receptors are nothing more than dendrites that are going to be receiving the information. It's all they do. Touch, pressure, pain, vibration, itch, any of that. The general senses. That's all they are modified dendrites feeding information into the neuron. They're stimulated and they send a signal to the neuron, which sends a nerve impulse to the brain. So they are very, very simple structures. The complex receptors, the special senses, are all individually housed in what we call the sense organs. The eye is a sense organ. The nose is a sense organ. So the sensory receptors are protected inside this organ. Now, our simple receptors deal with the general senses. The simple receptors are tactile, touch, pressure, stretch, and vibration, temperature, pain, and our muscle sense, our proprioceptors. Where are we anyway? So now these general senses can respond to multiple types of stimulation. A receptor can respond to itch or pressure or stretch or vibration. Now, temperature receptors are different, pain receptors are different, and proprioceptors are different. But for the tactile, they can all detect each touch receptor can detect all the various types of stimulus. So those are the general senses. Now, these general senses, their dendrites are either going to be the free nerve ending, which is nothing more than the dendrite sticking out there in the skin. The end of the dendrite's right at the surface of the skin, and it's stimulated by touch or pressure or vibration or stretch or itch. So it stimulates it or not, but it's nothing more than just a simple dendrite. We call it a non-encapsulated or free nerve ending. So just think of the dendrite, just a nerve fiber sticking up there just below the surface of the skin, responding to touch or pressure or vibration or itch or stretch. The encapsulated nerve endings are a little different. The encapsulated nerve endings are still the dendrite, but now they have layers of connective tissue wrapped around them to protect them. So their kind of stimulus it has to be a little greater to turn this on. You know, they're going to be dealing with deep pressure or deep stretch, deep inside the dermal layer. So they're going to be further down in the body. And so these encapsulated nerve endings take a greater stimulus to turn them on. So the free nerve endings are found in the epithelial layers and in our connective tissues. They are very, very small structures. Temperature receptors are non-encapsulated. Pain receptors are non-encapsulated. Light touch are non-encapsulated. So they're going to all respond. You know, they're not going to have anything in the way. We don't want any kind of tissue surrounding our free nerve ending to avoid detecting pain or temperature or even light touch. So, because all three of those, you know, it's important to detect those for our protection. Okay. Now, the encapsulated nerve endings, the dendrites, covered with layers of connective tissue in a capsule, they are mechanoreceptors. They detect strong pressure, strong sensation. For example, Meissner's corpuscles are found just below the skin. We find these in the areas of our fingertips. These are for discriminating touch. We can determine the grit on two pieces of sandpaper. You know, if you know anything about sandpaper, you know it comes in various levels of grit on there. With the greater the number, the smoother the paper is, because you get a very smooth finish. If you want to get a nice, almost surface like glass, you might use a sandpaper with a grit of 600. If you want to take a lot of imperfections off of a piece of wood, you would use a piece of sandpaper of 60. So, because that'll take a lot of wood off and you'll smooth out all of the imperfections. So, and you can tell when we say discriminating touch, you can rub your hand across the surface and say that's smooth. You can rub it across a different surface, say that is really smooth. Or you can rub it across a third surface and say that's a very rough surface. You know, it's like rubbing your finger across a whiteboard surface as opposed to the concrete in the sidewalk. But rubbing your finger across a piece of glass as opposed to the whiteboard. The glass would be even smoother. So Meissner's corpuscles allow you to discriminate between the different levels of stimulus. And we find these in the areas of our fingertips where we're touching everything. In sensitive areas, we will have these Meissner's corpuscles. Now, the other structure, the other corpuscle we encounter is what's known as a Pacinian corpuscle. These are very large receptors located deep in the dermis. They respond to deep pressure. You know, like getting a full body massage, for example, or vibration. You know, the vibration you get when you're riding a lawnmower, for example, and it vibrates, or you're using you're using a power tool using a chainsaw, for example, or using a power tool, you get a lot of vibration with that. Or maybe you're working on your car and the car is vibrating a lot and you're trying to figure out why it's running so rough. That is vibration that the pituitary corpuscles will detect. So here are these various structures. This is a free nerve ending right there. This is a pain receptor right at the edge of the dermis. The layer, this is the epidermis here, and this is the dermal layer right here, where these folds are. And there we see pain receptors, free nerve endings. Over here, we see a Meissner's corpuscle, discriminating touch right there. No capsule wrapped around it to tell what it is. Here is a Pacinian corpuscle down here. This is going to be for dealing with deep pressure. Here's another corpuscle here. This is called a Ruffini's corpuscle. This is a Mechanoreceptor. So we have these, there's a Merkel disc. I don't want to get carried away here. Free nerve ending over here, pain. Free nerve ending for touch. Here we have the hair root plexus wrapped around the root, it gets stimulated when the hair shaft moves. Here we have a Meissner's corpuscle and a Pacinian corpuscle. These are layers of connective tissue wrapped around here. We have to get through, the stimulus has to get through the connective tissue layer for us to even be aware of it. So, yeah. What about the thermoreceptors? They're free nerve endings. Thermoreceptors are going to be either for heat or for cold. They have ranges that they function within. So we essentially have thermoreceptors for cold and thermoreceptors for heat. And we see where many of our receptors are located. We have, apparently 8% in our lower legs, 21% in our heads, 38% in our trunk, 5% in our hands. So now, they work within their operational range. If you exceed that range, then they shut down. They're destroyed if you exceed their operating range. If you exceed the heat range, they're destroyed, and then pain receptors start kicking in. If you exceed their cold temperature, if you get down below their operating temperature, you destroy the temperature receptors, and then the pain receptors kick in when, whether, in this case, frostbite. If you're in a heat receptor and the temperature goes up, we destroy the temperature receptor, and then it hurts from the burn. So, okay. Now, pain receptors are going to be a little different here. Pain receptors, we call them nociceptors. They're free nerve endings. Pain is our body's way of saying, stop, don't do that. You're about to have tissue damage, so stop doing that. And so pain is our warning so that we don't keep doing what we're doing. Because as I've said numerous times, if it hurts to do something, we don't do it. Because pain's telling us not to do that. Now, what causes pain? Well, pressure and temperature. You hit your hand or your foot or a body part, being pressed by two objects or something. Maybe you have hit your thumb with a hammer, for example. Extreme temperature, something's very hot or something's very cold. You put your hand down on a hot surface on the stove and it hurts, or you pick up a piece of dry ice by accident, thinking I don't know why you would, but you do. And it's so cold, it burns your skin. Different acids, for example, are going to cause pain. Sharp objects will cause pain. These are all the different things that can cause pain for us. Sound, high levels of sound can cause pain. It can hurt. So there are various things that can cause pain. One of the thing about pain receptors is that pain receptors never adapt. Now, many of our sensory receptors can adapt. We can get used to, as we say, we get used to it. We can adapt to odors, where we no longer notice the odor. We can adapt to background sound, so we no longer notice the sound in the background. We're so used to it, we don't hear it anymore. People that live near a highway, live near the interstate, so we don't hear it. We don't hear the noise, only something exceptional. Or you get used to a particular odor. Those we can adapt. Pain is one of those stimuli that we never adapt to. We don't adapt to pain because pain is our body's warning signal. We adapt to touch. When we put our clothes on in the morning, we don't, we put them on and then the rest of the day we ignore the fact that they're there. We're not thinking about, your collar until I mentioned it. Now you're not thinking about the tag on your shirt collar or how how your shoes feel or any of those things. You don't pay attention to that. You adapt to those sensations until I've mentioned it. And then everybody's thinking about their shoes or their shirt collar or something like that. But pain is one of those things that we never adapt to. Now, what kind of pain do we deal with? Well, we have fast pain and slow pain. Fast pain is what you get when you get a paper cut or when you step on something hot or sharp. You cut yourself or hit yourself with a hammer or get pinched between two pieces of equipment. Fast pain, acute, sharp pain. Slow pain is the chronic pain. Aching pain. You have a sore back. You have a sore muscle. You have a patient that has a bad toothache, and it's an abscess and it hurts. Their back hurts. Their hand hurts. They've got acid reflux, and so they have a lot of burning sensation in their stomach and in their esophagus. This is slow pain. Fast pain versus slow pain. Yeah. Pain also comes in visceral pain and referred pain. Visceral pain comes from the viscera. That's why they call it visceral pain. Our muscles hurt. That's visceral pain. You have exercised or done a lot of work and your muscles are sore. You have reflux. You have bloating or swelling in the abdomen from the food you've eaten. You may have be having a heart attack. You may have gallbladder pain. All of these can be visceral pain. It may hurt to breathe. You may have a broken rib. You have visceral pain. Visceral pain is internal. It is all internal. Now, referred pain is what throws a real curve at us. Referred pain is pain that shows up that is perceived coming from one body part when it's actually being generated in a different region. Classic example. Lots of people, when they're having a heart attack, claim that they're having pain in their left arm. And they're perceiving pain in their left arm when they're having a heart attack. Or they complain of a very powerful toothache in their mandible, the lower jaw. Or they have a great deal of pain in their abdomen. Well, it seems that the nerve that innervates the left arm and the abdomen and the lower and the left side of the mandible, is the same nerve. They all innervate. They innervate the heart as well as the left jaw and the arm and the abdomen. And so heart attack pain can often be interpreted as pain coming from the left arm or even the lower jaw or even the abdomen. You may have a patient present in the emergency department with complaining of a very bad, very powerful toothache on the left side of their mandible. And before you refer them to a dentist, you may want to consider that that might be heart attack pain because it has happened in the past. The classic signs of referred pain, of course, are pain in the left arm when they're having a heart attack. The pain sensations from heart attack pain travel along the same pathways. Visceral pain travels along the same pathways as somatic pain does. Somatic pain, surface pain, pain in the arm. And so the pathways coming to the brain on the vagus nerve, it's called the vagus nerve. The pathways traveling along the vagus nerve are coming along the same pathways that it does from the arm. So your brain is perceiving the pain not in your heart, but in your left arm. And so it assumes that. Consider every time you hit your funny bone. You know, you hit the ulnar nerve, runs along the olecranon process, your elbow. You smack that against something. Where does the sensation appear to come from? What you perceive is that the pain is in your fingers of your hand. Your fingers, and you know, your fingers become tingly, your thumb is tingly. You've stimulated the ulnar nerve at the olecranon process, your elbow, and yet you're perceiving it in your hand because the sensations that travel to the brain from the ulnar nerve are going to follow those perceptions, those sensations are traveling the somatic nerve pathway. And so the somatic nerve pathway says, oh, it's your fingers. It's not your elbow. You perceive it that way. Referred pain means sometimes it's challenging for us to ascertain what's wrong with a patient by saying, where's it hurt? Because their perception of where it hurts may not be where the true source is. So you have to take that into consideration. If their left arm hurts, you got to consider their heart. But sometimes the left arm hurts because the left arm really hurts. You know, sometimes pain is just pain, you know, so you can't assume anything. Now, consider the gallbladder. Gallbladder sits up on the right-hand side of the abdominal cavity, just underneath the ribs on the right-hand side, just below the diaphragm. Gallbladder sits there. Gallbladder gets inflamed, it hurts. And a lot of people, it hurts right where the gallbladder is located. But sometimes the gallbladder likes to cause pain to occur at the right shoulder or over the right shoulder. Now, is it the gallbladder or is it something else? Now, the gallbladder conveniently has a variety of other symptoms that may or may not show up, including nausea and vomiting and fever and lots of flatulence, lots of gas. Most of the times, but not all the time. And I will tell you, sometimes right shoulder pain is what shows up in pneumonia, and it can also show up in a heart attack. So just because their right shoulder hurts doesn't mean that it's not their gallbladder. It might very well be their gallbladder, but it might be something else too. So pain is one of those symptoms that is hard to diagnose its source from, just because pain doesn't play by the rules. Okay, now, referred pain generally usually shows up in these kind of patterns here. So, for example, the heart attack pain can show up in the lower jaw on the left-hand side, of course, in the left side of the chest and all the way down the left arm. And usually it can show up in the abdomen too, because the vagus nerve innervates the area below the rectus abdominis. The gallbladder normally shows up here, but also up here. So you have some, some flexibility. Look at the appendix. It can be stretched all the way across the abdominal cavity on the right-hand side. The ureters, or the, let's see, where's the kidney? There's the kidney, but kidney pain can stretch, oops. Kidney pain from trying to pass a kidney stone can be anywhere along the flank. So it's very difficult to use, it's very challenging to use pain as your only tool to diagnose a condition. The pain gives you a starting point to look at, but there's a, referred pain is going to throw us a curve on every time. So, and sometimes they're going to have chest pain right where they're supposed to have when they're having a heart attack. And sometimes their gallbladder is going to act up and give you pain right where it's supposed to be. And their appendix is going to hurt on the right side of the abdomen in the right lower quadrant, just like it's supposed to. And you'll consider yourself fortunate that day that you were able to make an easy diagnosis. And sometimes it'll be all over the place. So just be aware of that. Yeah. Receptors, except for pain, most receptors will adapt. Pain receptors never adapt because they're always giving us a warning. It's not always the correct warning, but they're giving us a warning. The receptors that adapt quickly are going to be touch, pressure, and smell. You adapt to odors easily. You adapt to touch easily. You adapt to pressure. You sit in your chair for an hour and a half, and you're not, after an hour and a half, you get up and you're not even really aware that you've been sitting in a very uncomfortable plastic chair in a classroom for an hour and a half. If you adapt to the touch receptors and your legs and your gluteus adapt to the pressure of you sitting there. You're not aware of it after a while. You adapt to it. You adapt to odors. I used to, if we were on the ground, what I usually like to do is open up some sort of bottle of perfume or something and let it sort of diffuse around the room, and you'll smell it. And then at the end of the period, we won't smell it anymore. And I usually would have somebody come in from outside and say, "Oh, what's that?" And I ask them, "What's the odor you smell?" Because we won't smell it anymore. We will have adapted to it. So now that's how we adapt. Now the ones that don't ever adapt, pain receptors never adapt. But they're not the only ones. Body position doesn't adapt either. We don't adapt body position because we always have to know where our bodies are in space. We also don't adapt to the chemical makeup of our blood. Our blood pH is very, very important to us. The sodium concentration in our blood is very important to us. The presence of oxygen levels in our blood is very important to us, as well as carbon dioxide. So we don't ever adapt that. We don't ever adapt to the makeup of our blood. That never becomes something, oh, it's okay. We're always monitoring our blood, monitoring the pressure in there, monitoring the temperature, monitoring the chemical makeup of our blood. Are we too acidic? Are we too basic? Do we have too much glucose? Do we have not enough glucose? What's going on? And we're always responding to a change, always. So we never adapt. Okay, let's see. Now, Okay. Let's see. Let me just tell you what proprioception is, and we'll call it a day on this. Proprioception. This is the movement of our bodies and our awareness of our position in space at all times. We know where we are without having to look. We have proprioceptors embedded in our muscles, embedded in our tendons, and embedded in our joints that tell us where we are. They tell us our movement. They tell us how fast we're moving our arms and legs. They tell us how much weight we've applied to these various structures, and they tell us what the limit is that we can hold or what we can deal with. You know, are we carrying something? Are we trying to pick up something we can't sustain, and do we drop it? It's too heavy for us. We try to pick it up and it slips out of our hands. It is too heavy for us. Now, what our brain and spinal cord do for us is take proprioception, the stimulus of all these receptors in all of our muscles and all of our tendons and all of our joints here, and put it together to give us an idea, a very accurate idea of where our body is at any given time, how we are moving and how rapidly we are moving. You know, are we running? Are we walking? You know, are we driving a nail with a hammer? How fast are we hitting how vigorously are we hitting the nail with the hammer? Are we tapping it or are we smashing it? And so we use this to control our response to our environment. So, and having said that, I think that's a great place to stop for today. And we will move on next week and finish the second half, do the second half of the general senses. Any questions on any of this? Okay, then I'm going to get us out of here, and I will see you in lecture on Wednesday.